And now let me introduce our speaker. Gordon Kaiser has worked 30 years in the information technology industry, primarily as an engagement manager at specialty firms involved in software systems integration for Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM. More recently, he was tasked with developing a new software imaging group in the autonomous systems of Boeing. Most recently, semi-retired working for Humana. During these many years, Gordon noticed that the majority of the most intelligent individuals did not live up to their potential. It is in answering that why that has led to the future you. Gordon Kaiser, the future you, Gordon Kaiser.
All right, thank you. And welcome, Toastmasters and guests. I've shared my screen. I hope you have a chance to see that. Let me know if you see my screen. D, I need my power plug. Can you see my screen?
Yes. You're
Fantastic.
muted, Gordon.
Thank you so much. Welcome, Toastmasters and guests. My talk today is going to be about how we can reach our future, our fullest potential for a better future you. And I've learned one big lesson over 30 some odd years in information technology for companies that partner with major corporations, and even in my personal life. People fail to reach their fullest potential because they lack self-awareness. And you might say, why is lacking self-awareness such a bad thing? Who cares? In a company, it impacts the bottom line. In someone's personal life, it'll affect relationships with family, friends, and life partners. Now, I want to show you this slide. My brother with 4 kids would not like this, I can assure you. Or maybe you would. The robot nanny. I won't be talking about artificial intelligence today as the future you. You don't want to be artificially intelligent. They were doing some artificial intelligence testing with a Tesla in Vegas in January. A Tesla on a test track ran over a toddler dummy placed in an intersection. Now you know why it's called artificial. What separates us from robots is our imagination, something computers may imitate but never replicate. Consider that a campaign slogan for a future human running against iRobot. If we're not self-aware, we might as well be robots. How many people in here think they are self-aware? Raise your hand on that reaction button. Well, organizational psychologist Tasha Eurich published an article in the Harvard Business Review describing a study involving 5,000 participants, and that while 85 to 90% of people believe they are self-aware, only 10 to 15% of people are self-aware. If you've ever said something you've regretted, maybe you're not self-aware. Have you ever intentionally said something you knew would hurt someone? A lack of self-awareness can harm relationships with partners, children, coworkers, your boss. Or if you are self-aware, at least be able to recognize that lack of self-awareness in others to manage the relationship. A lack of self-awareness at a security software startup I worked at cost investors over $20 million. Microsoft was considering a purchase of the company. I left the meeting where they declined the purchase. One of the programmers came up to me and asked, how'd it go? And I said, well, that's a no-go. They didn't see the value. He then asked me, well, what does that mean? They didn't see the value. I said, what, are you on the board now? Do you want meeting minutes? If I had been more self-aware, I might have laughed and said, well, they aren't interested in paying 70 times revenue. And that comment was a reflection of an already toxic sarcasm building at the company from the CEO down. And now you may ask, what is self-awareness? Well, Dr. Urich says it best, quote, we have an internal and an external self-awareness. Internal self-awareness is about understanding our own behaviors and objectively recognizing their impact on ourselves and others. External self-awareness is recognizing how others interpret our behaviors. It's worth repeating. Understand your own behaviors and understand how others interpret your behavior. Here's a more personal example, which is at least equally, if not more important than work life to me. When I was young and married, I prioritized my work over my marriage. My wife found someone more attentive and we divorced. You might call that an affair, I guess. If I'd been more self-aware, I would have looked at where I was prioritizing my time and made adjustments, or not. Maybe I wouldn't have gotten married if I'd been more self-aware. When I described these two events, did you think about where self-awareness might be lacking in your life? Unlike the chips and wires in that robot brain, our brain is biochemical in nature. And if we don't know how the tool works, we can't use it as designed. Our understanding of how the mind works has changed greatly over the past decades. In the 50s, post-World War II, the US is the superpower, creator of the atomic bomb. Science would cure all problems, including behavior modification. We used electric shock treatment to cure psychiatric disorders. In the 60s, psychotropic drugs would provide an enlightened mind. And in the 90s, drug companies emphasized prescription meds. And from the 90s to the 2000s, self-help books promoted motivation as a key to changing behavior. And in the last 15 years, we've come to understand the biochemical nature of the brain and how it controls behaviors. Remember, behavior affects the actions we take, and actions produce the results. Negative behavior is more likely to produce negative results, right? 2 + 2 = 4, pretty simple. We try to approximate the power of the brain by comparing it to a computer. In some ways, this makes sense. We compare the brain's electrical activity, that of a computer. Our brain computes things, but our brain is far more powerful than a computer in many respects. The 3-pound mass sitting on your shoulders contains 86 billion neurons. Computers just do what we tell them to do. 3 weeks ago, a Tesla with 8 cameras and 12 ultrasound sensors on a closed asphalt road ran over a dummy toddler crossing the street in the dark. Well, data is used to find the object, and in this case, the toddler. Some programmer, probably without children, didn't know how to define the object's dimensions. A future you in 20 years could include miniature implanted chips to enhance capabilities like memory, mathematics, rapid reading, a storehouse of memories and other data, a chip in the head with wireless access to Instagram and TikTok. Imagine that. Elon Musk's company, Neuralink, is developing a computer chip with threads smaller than a human hair coming out of it with electrodes connected to just 1,000 neurons of the 86 billion neurons that we have. So I was curious about this. How thick, considering the size of the human hair, would something like this be if they built it over maybe just 1 billion neurons. Well, it comes out to be 48 meters, it turns out, something that would be coming out of the back of your head. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But Elon's dream is actually realistic. He's a pretty self-aware guy. He's just trying to bridge some of the electrical impulses in the brain for people with spinal cord injuries to help them walk again. Now, right now, it's just in pigs, and they can only tell when the pig smells something or is hungry. But Elon does have a talent taking existing technology and using the imagination to improve on the practical aspects of what is currently being done. It's his imagination that takes current state and applies it in a unique way or accelerates the development process. Elon's very self-aware about the goals he needs to achieve his vision. And we all have that capability to tap into our minds in a similar fashion. The more we become self-aware, the more we can tap into our imagination, understand ourselves, and overcome challenges. And right now, we are going to do some exercises to practice self-awareness. Now, I'm going to show you various images, and I'm going to ask you what you recognize first in the image. If you saw the pillars first, it could point to the possibility that you prefer comfort and security over most things. Accomplishing your big goals in life will not be possible unless you learn to break out of the comfort zone. If you saw people first, it means that you're a free spirit who's ready to leave your current surroundings at the drop of a hat. Life hardly ever seems dull to you. In fact, it's full of incredible people and adventures. You're a curious kind of soul, but don't wander for too long. Be ready when the right time comes to settle down. Do you agree or disagree with what I just said? Now, what do you see first in this slide? If you saw the faces first, it means that you're very people-oriented. Or you have people on your mind a lot of the time. You tend to be more of an extroverted person who gets their energy from social interactions. Make sure to surround yourself with the right people who are supportive and positive. If you saw the candlesticks first, you're more of an introvert. People aren't on your mind as much as those who saw the faces in the image first. You tend to be more caught up in your own thoughts. You like being at home more than you like going out and being surrounded by a lot of people. You enjoy being alone or with a few close friends. Do you agree or disagree with what I've described in this slide? Let's take a look at the next image. If you saw the car first, it most likely means that freedom is very important to you. Traveling is dear to your heart. The ability to hit the road and go on an adventure is something you highly prioritize. You take life at your own pace and do what comes naturally. If you saw the man with the binoculars, it alludes to the idea that you're a more analytical person. You tend to focus on the big picture and disregard minor details. You're a visual learner and pick up lessons quickly, but you may not want to make an effort, as important things can be lost out there if you lose sight of the big picture. If you saw the letter A, this is arguably the most difficult thing to see in this image. If the letter A is the first thing you saw, it means you have an eagle eye. You tend to be more detail-oriented than most and highly intuitive. You usually are able to pick up on subtle hints or nuances that may go unnoticed by many others. Now, what I'd like to ask the audience, you've given some thought to these different slides, but I would like to ask an audience member about this particular slide. Would you be open to letting us know what you saw on the slide And more importantly, if why you agree or disagree, because we're not here to do a personality test. There's plenty of those online. The idea is to talk about what you saw and how it described your personality, and then if you agree or disagree. Now, go ahead and use the reaction button to raise your hand. And Stella, I think I saw your hand. What I'd like to ask is, when you looked at the slide, many of you were not aware of the conversation going on in your mind. When you look over this again, do you catch that conversation? Stella, you wanted to make a comment about that?
I actually saw the A first. And I think I agree with you.
You agree or disagree?
I agree. I'm more actually big picture kind of person.
Well, take me through just a touch of what you were talking to yourself about with that slide. You agreed or disagree? The letter A, that's the one where it's difficult to see, the eagle eye, detail oriented. So in your mind, when you saw that, you said to me, well, Gordon, yes, the eagle eye, I get it. That's me, I am detailed. Now,
Yes.
take it one step further. Do you think maybe, are you too detailed? Has that affected your work in any way? Do you get bogged down in the weeds when you try to describe something to someone?
Yes, I actually have to unlearn how to not be too detailed. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, and that has happened to me also. In presentations at work, or even talking to somebody in my personal life, I can get so detailed that it just loses track for people as well. Well, I appreciate that. So does somebody else want to comment on that? All right.
Yeah, Gordon, I saw the binoculars guy first, but it was very close. I saw the binoculars guy first, kind of with the car, but binoculars guy just slightly first.
Well, tell me this, what were you saying to yourself in your mind when you saw that? Did you say, I agree or disagree?
I agree, pretty analytical, more or less. And then but also closely tied to the freedom. So I mean, I see why I saw both kind of at the same time, because both are very near and dear.
And that's kind of the point of the exercise, really, is to take it to that next step and think about how we're talking to ourselves, because sometimes people may feel so adamant about one thing, that could be a problem in how they interact with people or how they even evaluate themselves. Because the point of the exercise is not whether you agree or disagree with the analysis. It's the question. It was really just to spur your thought processes. And the exercises, and we can go back on mute. I have a lot of material to cover. The exercises really illustrate a tool called self-talk. Chad Helmstetter wrote a book titled What to Say When You Talk to Yourself. And why is this important? Self-talk is that bridge to the subconscious when we choose to think about it. Thoughts are biochemical in nature. And that's how self-talk can be used to rewire those electrical impulses to increase positive behaviors and decrease negative behaviors. And I'm going to touch on that in a few minutes. What Chad Helmstetter found is that most self-talk falls into that subconscious realm because it's just a habit. I mean, you'd go crazy if you were aware of that all the time. However, for anyone still trying to wrap their head around it, all right, here are a couple of quick examples. Let's say I saw the car first, and I like being adventurous. Maybe I'm too spontaneous, though. My girlfriend likes to plan things, but she gets upset sometimes with spontaneity. Maybe I need to think more about this. It could harm our relationship. I'd like to end our relationship, though. No, I'm just kidding. But those are the kind of things that being self-aware and utilizing self-talk can help with. Or you saw the binoculars first, that slide. Maybe you disagreed with it. Slide's wrong. I do focus on the details. People say I'm very detail oriented, and I'm proud of that. That slide is so wrong. I'm so detailed, I'll make my kids cut their hair just the way I like it. Bobby says he hates me, but I know he loves me. Or is this a developing problem though? I mean, let me think about this, what Bobby's saying. So you start to get into that self-conversation. Really, I think you get the point. Just be conscious of negative emotions that you feel or others feel in relation to you. It might be a signal to use that self-talk to rewire some neurons. So go to the next slide. As Dr. Helmstetter says, during the first 18 years of our lives, if we grew up in a fairly average, reasonably positive home, we were told no, or what we couldn't do, or what would not work more than 50,000 times. And it's come to us from our brothers, sisters, teachers, work, and social media, where we just don't measure up. We face negativity every day, whether in conversations at work or home or on the news. Negative thoughts directed to children are especially destructive, and kids can be cruel because they just don't have or are not taught the capacity to be self-aware. I remember riding the 7th grade school bus, listening to these kid athletes yelling, "Brains are brawn, brains are brawn, you geeks." When I was 7, I had this little guitar, and my older teenage brother was in a band. He told me I was tone deaf. I couldn't play. Well, I didn't touch a musical instrument until I was 23, and then I found I could learn to play the alto sax. I wasn't tone deaf, and maybe if my parents had been more self-aware, it would have been different. It can take a long time for negativity to get rewired. Neuroscientists have discovered that repetitive thoughts form neural pathways as neurons that fire together, wire together. And maybe you've actually heard that before, but there's scientific basis behind it. Less used neurons, like if you start to repress those negative thoughts, become less functional. With practicing that positive self-talk directed to a specific behavior, we rewire that pathway. If you want to take a self-assessment to determine your level of negative emotion, I'll have that link in my source material. It does take about 15 minutes with 50 questions. It was done by a Stanford researcher who has gotten a lot of recognition for his work in that area on negative thoughts. Thoughts have a physical aspect to them. Your thoughts create electrical signals, and that is the basis of how that self-talk will change behavior. Now I'd like to get into this just a little bit more because we've got to have some context for what I'm about to talk about. Self-talk is a bridge to that subconscious when we consciously think about what we say to ourselves. Thoughts are biochemical. I've mentioned that, but I'll reiterate it, and electrical in nature, and that's how that self-talk is used to rewire electrical impulses. The thought goes from one neuron, flows to another neuron across a small gap called a synapse. At the synapse, electrical signals are translated into chemical signals in order to cross that gap. Once on the other side, the signal becomes electrical again. It's a thought. Neurotransmitters are the chemicals crossing the gaps, connecting those neurons. Neuromodulators like dopamine, I know a lot of you've heard of that before, help control numerous neurons, and you'll find dopamine depletion in people with Parkinson's. Drugs increase dopamine and then burn out the circuits, causing dopamine depletion over time. Dopamine plays a role in how we feel pleasure, as you may have heard. It's a big part of our unique human ability to think and plan. It helps us strive, focus, and find things interesting. Things we find pleasurable and interesting, we often want to do over and over again. We are hardwiring our brains to influence to do this over and over. Associate positive emotion, the action or process goals you're taking to reach an outcome goal. And this will release dopamine and rewire that neural pathway. This helps us create habits that help us reach goals on our way to a vision. Now I want to talk about goals a little bit. What does the term a goal mean to you? A goal, everybody's heard this a million times over the years, but we don't really define it. A goal is not a vision. A vision is the destination. Goals are the results of the actions, the steps that take you to your vision. Goals are not desires. Goals are not expectations. Goals demand focus and clarity. And some people think vision boards will motivate them toward their goals. And I talked to a psychiatrist friend who told me vision boards stunt growth. Rather than get out there and work toward their goals, people who created vision boards seem to be waiting for the universe to grant their wishes. Remember the law of attraction? Research backs up this idea of vision boards not working. In 2011, study published in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology found that fantasizing about an idealized future decreases the likelihood that someone will expend energy trying to turn a fantasy into reality. When you put a picture of a 15,000 square foot home on your vision board, your brain reacts as if you already have it. You'll experience a relaxation response that reduces your energy, decreases motivation. However, research says if you visualize the process to take you to the end goal, you might find some success as long as you're self-aware enough to be realistic. Is the plan to take you there in this lifetime with current assets and income doable? Well, let's say your goals are realistic. Many people rarely achieve goals because they confuse process goals with outcome goals. And outcome goals are only based on results, while process goals are based on undertaking the right activities that will eventually lead to a great outcome. Think of process goals as a routine. Goals can be applied to different areas of our lives, such as personal development, career education, health, family, relationships, Toastmaster goals. Goals can be based on time, lifetime goals, long-term goals, and short-term goals, stepping stone goals. Let's say you have your goals established for the short and long term. Let's say you understand that you have process goals to take you to that end goal. But what happens when goals meet challenges? Well, the majority of people don't want to look failure in the face. Fear invokes fight or flight, and our first reaction is to flee back to our comfort zone. Fear is our brain's most powerful motivator. 98% of the population is quite happy staying in a safe, comfortable place. Challenges are not viewed as opportunities, but as problems to avoid. Carol Dweck, the psychologist, describes this in her research as a growth mindset. Her book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, talks about the difference between fixed and growth mindset. If you have a fixed mindset and are afraid of failure, consider this tool to overcome fear of failure. Now, this I don't think you've heard of before. It's called fear motivation. Bill Gates, Tim Ferriss, and the late Steve Jobs, instead of focusing on success, they considered the fear of what happens if I don't achieve this goal. Now, this kicks the fear center of the brain into overdrive. Nothing makes us more uncomfortable than fear. Now, Bill Gates said he was always afraid of the competition and used that as motivation. And Tim Ferriss actually creates a fear list of what happens if I don't. Steve Jobs in 2005, quote, "Death is the single best invention in life. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. All fear of embarrassment or failure these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important, unquote. Pretty powerful. A little bit scary too. If the brain is a Formula One race car, fear-based motivation is putting your foot to the floor. Fear is a short-term survival mechanism to get us to a safe place. When running from lions, we didn't evolve to be this anxious in the long term. If money is a measure of success, fear-based motivation worked for Steve and Bill, but we don't know how happy they are or were. Steve was known for how hard he drove employees, creating a toxic workplace for many. Bill was a friend of Jeffrey Epstein, and his catchphrase at Microsoft was, "That's the stupidest idea I have ever heard." Well, wonderful if you want to generate a toxic workplace. These leaders created anxiety throughout the organization. It doesn't have to be that way. If they were more self-aware, they could have used fear motivation for themselves and probably refrained from creating so much anxiety in the workplace. Intelligence and self-awareness do not go hand in hand. I would really recommend using fear-based motivation very tactfully. Example, if I don't get my MBA, my life will never be the same. The what if? Or I'm going to prepare for an interview for a whole month because if I don't get the job, I'll lose my house. Fear-based motivation is powerful, and we have to be very careful how we're going to use it. Before fear-based motivation, first consider prioritizing areas of your life that might be overwhelming your attention. Now, we're juggling a lot of things in life, and we're trying to please people at work, home, and in our social sphere. There we go. And at some point, balls are going to drop. We burn out, people get fired or divorced, or we have poor health. Will my marriage fail if I keep focusing in these other areas of my life? Should I even be juggling this one or that one? What's more important? Now, this is a great opportunity to use that self-awareness and self-talk to think about prioritizing. I know you're probably talking to yourself right now about priorities in your life as you look at that slide. And I'm guessing, well, you probably understand by now, a better way than fear-based motivation for embracing challenges is going to be embracing the process goals that take you to that end goal. However, you have to prioritize. Talk to yourself with empathy, interest, and curiosity about why you should give something more attention. If you can't manage to find some positive emotion to associate with that ball that you might be juggling, maybe that's a sign that it's time to get rid of it. Now, because of COVID, one of my red things dropped. I had quit going to LA Fitness. I had just lost interest in going to the gym. And by the time it opened, well, I still didn't feel like going to the gym. My health is important, but I developed a habit. That neural pathway had grown for TV sports dopamine. Well, the treadmill has a TV on it. So I started watching games while exercising, enjoying other things at the gym, and it got me more involved and back into that. Here's an example from a work experience. I was assigned to analyze a future market for service at a Boeing subsidiary. My presentation would be given to executive management that reported to Boeing. And there was a lot of pressure, long hours. My work ball was getting way too big. My boss wanted me to create fictitious numbers. I refused. He became angry. And, well, he knew I had leverage over him. I also knew he would find a way to fire me. So I reduced the hours, enjoyed the rest of my time there until my analysis was presented, and the department of 75 people in this commercial division was fired. Now, I was happy, not for what happened, but I had been practicing self-awareness enough to know that I needed to leverage a situation. And I also knew they weren't running a charity. And if that division wasn't performing and producing the revenue they expected, then that's what's going to happen. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with you, it's called the Wheel of Life. Now, the Wheel of Life comes from mindtools.com, and it's a great tool for helping you balance your life. You've heard the term, dropping the ball. Well, this is an illustrated example of how you can start to prioritize to determine what areas you do need to drop. Now, put golf at the bottom of that. I did add that on this. This is a random chart, by the way. I was in my 30s, and I dated the ex-wife of a golfer. And she had told me that her ex-husband was spending 4 hours on the golf course and an hour hanging out afterwards, drinking beers while she was taking care of 2 toddlers. Divorce became the best option after 21 years. So let's do a simple chart together and just get an idea of that. Daniel, if you want to drop that link into the chat.
I just did.
Okay, fantastic. You'll click on that. Let's take a look at this. And I'm going to try to pull that up myself. Has everybody got it open?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, go ahead as you work through this, and I believe it's 1 through 9. As you take a look at this, start to evaluate them. And I'm going to try to pull this up myself. I'm having a little trouble. But start working through that. Let's see. Career. I'm going to put a 6 for myself. Love. I was told I need to spend a little more attention in that area. 5 is average. I'm going to put 4 for that. Spirituality. I feel like I'm a pretty spiritual person, but I'm not as spiritual as I could be. I'm going to do a 7. Family. Well, I don't have children. I got 2 dogs. My girlfriend lives with me, so I think we're doing pretty good there. Maybe you heard the dogs earlier too. They wanted to join. Let's see, money. I'm pretty content. We can always use more money. 1 probably being I want to win the lottery. 10 being I did win the lottery. I'll say a 7. Fun. So I'm going to put a 7 there. Friends. I'm feeling pretty good with that. I'm better than average. So my wheel is coming up and I'm seeing some areas that I need to work on. Probably I could pull some areas I'm spending time on with fun and friends, pull that together with love, because when you're with your partner, you can often combine the 2. So this is a very, very simple example of the Wheel of Life, just to give you a flavor of really the importance of prioritizing. Prioritizing is going to be key to self-awareness. And if you go online and look up Wheel of Life, I've got some source material in the slides that can take you to some more advanced slides as well. A balanced life doesn't mean you're getting 5 in each area. You just have to determine where you want to make compromises and where you're giving too much or too little attention. That's really the key here. And it depends on what stage of life you're in too. Some people that are 22 to 27 may want to focus on a career and make starting a family less of a priority. So one of the things that I'd like to do is go ahead and kind of recap where we've been here. So I started with a graphic of the brain and discussed the power of imagination of 86 billion neurons that a computer can imitate but not replicate. Remember the campaign slogan, imitate but not replicate. We exercised our self-awareness with the illusion examples, started to take a little bit of that and start to get an idea of what self-talk might sound like. Remember, self-talk thoughts are biochemical that can rewire negative thoughts and neural pathways to those that help us achieve goals and overcome challenges. Now, that positive emotional programming must be repetitive and related to those process goals or that routine, not just the outcome goal. And when I mentioned process goals, I could begin to substitute the word habit in there, but they're not exactly the same. And we're not going to get into habits probably today. It's a little bit separate, depends on a short-term habits, brushing your teeth and washing your hands after you go to the bathroom. A habit that involves much more planning. It really falls into the concept of process goals, and you cannot turn something that takes a lot of concentration over time into a habit. We reviewed the wheel of life, the tool you can use to prioritize and set goals for areas that need more attention. And if I boiled this down to a couple of statements, I would say, recognize that self-talk is a part of becoming more self-aware. Use positive emotion to rewire the neural pathways to create small goals on your way to bigger vision. Start creating the future you today.